there are constraints, but on the whole, sort of people are very happy, and there's a sort of very dynamic, interactive relationship between local people and the KNU administration.
Hello and welcome to episode 30 of What's Happening in Myanmar, a weekly show from the Frontier Myanmar podcast family. I'm your host, Luke Corbin. It's Thursday, June 5, and today I talk with two experts on the resistance against Myanmar military rule in Kachin or Karen state. They are So De-si, a Karen researcher and local resident of Kawthoolei, which is the name that Karen people use for their homeland. He's joined by Tony Neal, a PhD candidate at the London School of Economics and Political Science, and visiting fellow at the Australian National University. But before we dive into the deep end with our guests, I will quickly cover a couple of other pieces of news from the last week, one at the sort of high elite level, and one from the ground. To begin, over the last weekend, Frontier attended the ShangriLa Dialogue, an annual summit in Singapore where Asia-Pacific and Western leaders gathered to discuss security and defence in the region. Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim made an address that touched briefly on Myanmar, in a similar vein to Malaysian statements released over the ASEAN summit the week before. Ibrahim said that the election planned by Myanmar's State Administration Council, or SAC, would be pointless if it is not inclusive. He also said he planned to host unspecified participants in Myanmar's civil war to attend talks in Kuala Lumpur to find a, quote, lasting solution to the country's crisis. He didn't give any further detail. 3 delegates from Myanmar also had the opportunity to question regional politicians and defence ministers at the summit, who mostly responded with political platitudes. When questioned on Thailand's engagement with the Myanmar military and ethnic armed groups on the Myanmar border, Thailand Defence Minister Phumtham Wechayachai said, quote, as an immediate neighbour, Thailand's stance on Myanmar is different from others. And then he went on, quote, we sincerely hope to see democracy in Myanmar. We're trying our best to be a mediator and to find a peaceful resolution. Thailand is trying to be the bridge between the military and ethnic groups. The second piece of news, and much more on the ground, quite literally, the monsoon is now in full swing in Myanmar, with flooding reported in Myitkyina, the military-controlled Kachin state capital. Thousands of people there have left their homes since May 30. Most are sheltering in monasteries at higher ground. Last June, in 2024, nearly 3/4 of the Myitkyina urban area was inundated by floods, and many thousands needed humanitarian aid. The floods have also significantly affected Chipwe Township, which is now controlled by the Kachin Independence Army, and which has several camps for internally displaced people. Some 300 families have fled the rising waters there, as their temporary shelters in the IDP camps were washed away. Flooding also hit villages in Waimor and Puto townships in Kachin state. In other parts of Myanmar, flooding is causing mayhem in Rakhine State's Jautdo township, and the road between Rau and Jautdo is now impassable. The impending months of forecast rains will also likely affect the damaged buildings that are liable to collapse from the damage caused by the 28 March Sagaing earthquake, also likely to hinder reconstruction efforts and make life in general more difficult for the many homeless camped in tents and under tarpaulins in earthquake-affected areas. This past Sunday, Frontier released its latest Political Insider newsletter with an extensive discussion of the previous preparations for earthquake mitigation and response that were being put in place by Myanmar's previous governments, that is, before these efforts were curtailed by the 2021 military coup and the new regime's many failures. This deep dive is available to Frontier members, and I really recommend it for putting this tragic disaster in context at a time when most earthquake reporting so far, and for very good reason, has focused on the immediate humanitarian response, conflict, and ceasefires. So, of course, the Political Insider newsletter is available only to Frontier members. You can go to frontiermyanmar.net/membership membership if you aren't already a member. But you don't need to be a member to read the latest Frontier feature, which is live on the website about earthquake victims' struggles to receive compensation due to them from their earthquake insurance policies. Myanmar's insurance sector was nationalised in 1959 and only privatised again in 2013. Since then, companies encouraged those with the means to take out earthquake insurance. But there are many obstacles preventing people with these policies even getting their claims processed, including policyholders being required to engage with SAC authorities for reports of the damage. Oh, and just quickly before we get to our interview, I want to ask, did you know that Frontier actually has another podcast program? It's called Doatanam, which means Our Voice, and it focuses on human rights reporting in both English and Burmese languages. The latest episode dropped on Monday, and it's about the forgotten plight of displaced Kuki people in Sagaing Region's Damu Township. You can find it on your favourite podcast app. That's Doatan, Dohathan. Now, on to the news from Karen State. Brigade 7 of the Karen National Liberation Army, which is the KNLA, and allies have taken at least 4 military bases along the Thailand-Myanmar border in the past month, including the Baleldo, Kanali, and more key bases, which are between the Moe River and the Dorna mountain range, north of Myawaddy town proper. The KNLA's Brigade 6, meanwhile, conquered 5 military camps south of Myawaddy over the last 2 weeks. The most recent was the Borbo base on this Tuesday. The KNLA and its allies took that base despite artillery bombardment from a nearby base at Warli town and despite airstrikes from 3 fighter jets and 2 Y-12 bombers. Karen media reported more than 70 soldiers surrendered and around 40 were killed in the assault. And over 500 people fled over the border into Thailand. The battle was so intense that the Thailand Air Force also sent up 2 fighter jets to monitor the Myanmar bombing aeroplanes. As mentioned on this podcast last week, on May 28, the KNLA and its allies intercepted around 72 soldiers that were being sent from the Warli base to defend the Borbo base. They were ambushed as they re-entered Myanmar from Thailand. You see, the Warli and the Borbo bases are only about 10 kilometres from each other as the crow flies, if the crow flies over Thailand. Warli is in the tongue of Myanmar territory that sort of pushes the furthest east into Thailand. It nearly borders the adjoining province after Tak, which is Thailand's Kampang Phet. The KNLA previously took the Borbo base once in 2022, but they had to retreat following airstrikes. Many of the Myanmar military soldiers who retreated during all of these recent attacks are now massing at the Infantry Battalion 275 headquarters in Myawaddy town, which is surrounded by the KNLA but still military controlled. Though that base, of course, was also briefly defeated and occupied by the KNLA last year. So the hundreds of troops gathered there may make a push west for the Thingan Yinaon base, which lies at the edge of Myawaddy at the base of the mountain range and the Asian Highway. But as a Myawaddy resident told media outlet the Irrawaddy, quote, advancing on Thingan Yinaon won't be easy. Many Sitdat soldiers are demoralised. They could be ambushed and killed. The KNLA claims to have locked down all the routes west from Myawaddy town, except for the main road, which of course is in daily use by civilians. So this is a lot. A lot has happened. And to better understand this new reality on the ground in Myawaddy and more besides, let's welcome Tony Neal. Hello.
Thanks, Kotanthin, for the invitation to speak to you this evening.
And Saw DC. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me to you on this podcast.
And a quick note here that Saw DC is dialing in using Starlink, which is the only available internet where he lives. Sometimes his connection can be a little bit difficult to understand, but If you're patient, I think you will get a lot out of what he has to say. So let's get stuck in. To be honest, it's been kind of difficult to keep up with all these military bases that have been falling to the KNLA and their People's Defence Force, PDF, allies. I mean, it's difficult to sort out the big strategic victories from the sort of small stuff. But one thing that the reporting seems clear on is that most of the bases that the military lost, especially those in the north, they had been under the military's control for decades, basically ever since the fall of Manipur. For listeners who aren't familiar, Manipur is the KNLA's old headquarters, which it lost in 1995 when a faction of the predominantly quite Christian KNLA split off to form the new Democratic Karen Buddhist Army, we call the DKBA. That DKBA then joined with the Myanmar military to conquer Manipur. This sort of marked the most momentous defeat and setback for the KNLA in decades at that time, and it was a defeat that really changed the nature of the war in Kawthoolei. The fall of Manipur also drove about 9,000 people into refugee camps in Thailand, according to the United Nations at the time. But the KNLA has retaken Manipur. It retook it 6 months ago. There was not really a lot of discussion in the media at the time about it. So I think my first question to you both, thank you for waiting for it, is, are we now finally seeing sort of tangible victories that were actually enabled by this retaking of Manipur 6 months ago? Is that what's happening?
Yeah. In terms of Manipur was one of the first attacks that has now become a much larger trend that's part of a broader pattern of reclaiming the borderline, and this also sort of has some sort of historical continuity and repetition, in the sense that when the DKBA split in 1994-1995, this is exactly what the Tatmadaw and the DKBA did. They basically cleaved these whole long sections along the border from Manipur, right the way down south, down to Wolei, where they kind of tried to separate the KNU from the border and to stop it having access to Thailand and trade, etc. So what we can see now is they're kind of, repeating this trend, and they're trying to kind of, take this territory back and in a way cut the SAC from the border and from trade routes, but also to kind of, retake this territory.
Basically, I mean, in the first question, when we talk about what is the reason because of the fall of Manipur, the Myanmar government, they use we call psychological operation in terms of the different ideology, for example, in terms of the political ideology or religious. But in the Manipur, they use religious ideology or psychological operation of the religion to divide and control and divide and rule, because they know that, okay, especially during that period, I mean, not only in the Manipur area, but also in some parts of the border as well. And it's fully controlled by the KNU and the financial income as well. For example, during that period, you will see like the Thai and the Kawthoolei government, they also have like and not only the local trade, but also like some of the trade like in terms of the luggage. Every single day, the KNU gets lots of income in every single day in terms of the border trade. And also in the Manipur is a strategic spot. Then not only the stronghold of the KNU headquarters, but also the stronghold to make alliance with other ethnic group in Myanmar. Now it is the time that the KNU will take back and then benefit the KNU to build the government of the Kawthoolei. Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you for those explanations of the past, Dorsey, and of the now. So the KNLA wants to restore the autonomy that it had before 1995 and take back control over the Thailand border that it lost following the split and the defeat at Manipur. And this split led to the formation of the DKBA. But the DKBA actually went on to form the Karen Border Guard Force, the BGF, which we've mentioned a lot on this podcast. It's a group of amorphous alliances with many unethical business interests on the border. At the moment, it's still loosely allied with the Myanmar military. The BGF actually stopped the KNLA from keeping Myawaddy town when it took it last year. Is the BGF now helping the KNLA, hindering them? Will it ever give up on its partnership with the Myanmar military? Like if the KNLA liberates the entire border area, what then?
I think to talk about those BGF, I mean, not only the BGF but also the DKB or the PC, there are many splitter group. And that to talk about those groups, they will participate any authority that came into the power, and they think they're okay because they are in between. If they join only one side, they are likely to be negatively impacted by the other group. For example, if they let the resistant group to kick out the SAC in Myawaddy, they also left to make deal with the resistant group that they will also have chance to be able to run their business on the border as well. I think especially the BGF, they are not happy fully under control of the terminal or fully under control of the resistant group.
Yeah, this is something that we've actually both written about before for Frontier in an op-ed where the Karen BGF, when they announced that they wanted to sort of separate from the SAC and become the Karen, become the newly titled Karen National Army. One thing that was consistent among, comments made to the media from all their leaders was that they sort of wanted to be neutral. And I think what we have to realize is that in the way that they've evolved to sort of, capture and regulate illicit border trade and circulation coming from Thailand across to Myanmar, but also kind of in these spaces of disaggregated sovereignty where they've been able to build, these casino complexes, that they now have this high value infrastructure that, is really vulnerable to hot conflict. So for them, that they have to kind of play this sort of, strategic balancing act between the military and the resistance forces. And obviously, as the military's strength over time has waned, and the resistance forces and the KNLA has grown, they've had to strategically rebalance and rethink their strategy. So what they're trying to do is to sort of, have neutrality among all sides, but in practice, it's tricky because they do have sort of these kind of hierarchical obligations to the military. But so far, when the KNU came to take and the resistance forces, PDFs came to take Myawaddy, actually, we had friends on the ground and PDFs who had visited nearby who told us that Myawaddy was going to fall. But it seems that when it actually fell, even though they were able to win the military battle, at a senior leadership level between Karen leaders, they weren't able to sort of, they didn't have a sort of a political plan for how to take Myawaddy. So I think what we also have to realize is that, these negotiations aren't just military, but they're also political. And this will have to involve senior KNU leadership and the BGF and DKPA and others through the UCKAG, the United Karen Armed Groups Alliance, coming together and negotiating a way forward. So I don't think we will see a sort of a kind of a military toppling of the BGF by Karen forces, but there will be at some point, if they're able to, carry on consolidating territory, there will be some kind of, negotiated agreement.
Fascinating. Yeah, that's one to watch there. So I want to ask you, have these recent victories on the border opened up new spaces for the KNU's governance now to take root there? Are these populous areas?
So definitely, this is part of a much broader strategy that just hasn't started in the last couple of months, but has been quietly ongoing over the last couple of years. And what we can see is that really, the boundaries of Kawthoolei that were under full control have grown greatly. And what they do is, now that the KNU senior leadership has a mapped out idea of what the future boundaries of Kawthoolei will look like. So what they've been quietly doing is sort of through military means clearing out bases and expanding to these new borders. So yes, a huge amount of of territory has been taken, and I think that's a consistent pattern across all of the brigade areas, and they now have a kind of a new set of pre-agreed kind of outer limits of Kawthoolei. However, in certain areas that there's a sort of a vacuum where governance practices, and the administrative side haven't been able to catch up in time. So now they're also playing, a game of catching up and expanding, governance to kind of meet these new boundaries and to consolidate that.
Thanks for that, Tony. Now, shifting a little bit, another reason why the Kawthoolei has been so successful with all of these wins is because the Anga Column, which we've talked about on this show several times, is now widely seen to have definitely failed. It's been split into 3 groups. It's making no progress. And this much publicized push it was going to make with drones earlier this year doesn't seem to have really done anything. But if the military was to somehow resurrect this column and threaten Myawaddy again from its west, would that put all of these new gains again at risk?
So yeah, no, that's a really good question. In February, I spent a week with PDFs, and actually we got really close to Anga Column by the New Asia Road, just about 1 kilometer away, with White Tiger PDF, and they said that that they had been able to separate the column into 3 separate parts, as you pointed out, and that it's going to be difficult for them to join. However, at a kind of, very localized combatant level, there were concerns because obviously a lot of PDFs have moved recently to Borbo, to kind of start fighting beyond the Salween and especially for the Myanmar Burmese contingents of PDFs to kind of, to carry on this process of going home, and fighting, to get home. But I think that for some of the kind of local PDFs who are still remaining and some of the Karen commanders, that there were concerns about the number of troops on the ground and the ability to kind of hold back Anga Column. They were aware that fresh recruits and supplies were coming to Anga Column all the time. So we know that these new recruits that are arriving to join the SAC, aren't well trained and morale is low. However, there are strengths to numbers. I mean, I think that the good news is what this, these recent successful KNLA and PDF attacks show is that, actually they've been able to hold Anga in check. So it seems that for the time being, it's going to be very difficult for Anga to sort of come together and march onto Myawaddy.
All right. Now, you've just brought up this phenomenon of PDFs sort of fighting to get home, There was a great piece by Myanmar Now just this week. One of its reporters spent a month on the west bank of the Sittaung River in areas controlled by PDFs. They entered from KNLA areas in the east. That article describes the buffer zone that the PDFs are maintaining between the KNLA and the Myanmar military. This is between the old Yangon-Mandalay Road and the Sittaung River. And it also talks about the difficulties of fighting in these flatlands on this really crucial north-south axis from Yangon to the cities of the dry zone, Naypyidaw, Mandalay, etc. So how is strategy in that conflict theatre related to what's happening in Myawaddy and the Eastern Brigade areas?
Yeah, perhaps if I kick off with that one, Day, because I've been I've been talking quite a lot to PDF combatants who have now moved to Borbo, and so some of them are down in Yongle Bin, about 100 miles from Yangon. They're part of Yangon Battalion 5101. And then others have moved up to kind of, the Peguyoma, the Borbo Yoma, or what they call the Borbo Trench. And, there's this idea that goes back to the kind of the post-independence period that kind of, this Borbo Trench, if you control this Borbo Trench, it's kind of like the keys to Myanmar. And you're able to control lower and upper Myanmar. So in that sense, it kind of, pivoted there as a kind of, strategic new frontier. And in particular, whilst they don't have formal agreements on the ground, they're coordinating very closely with the Arakan army who's come through the Arakan Yoma to the other side to cut off that narrow strip of valley that runs up to Pie. And then, on the other side, you obviously have the kind of Yangon, Mandalay north-south access. So, whilst at least 2,000 of them have moved across and up into the mountains in the Borbo Yoma, and they're kind of, setting up for the incoming next dry season. Most of their supply lines for ammunition is coming, all the way from Thailand. So there is a considerable distance. However, we do know that they've been stockpiling for a long time, and they've been preparing to make this move for at least, the last 12 to 18 months. So I think that this new kind of theater of conflict is going to be the one to look out for in the forthcoming dry season.
That is interesting. Okay, so thinking about those supply lines you mentioned, it is very far. If we take an example from Nyongli Bin to the Thailand border, many mountains, many kilometers. But controlling that border is very lucrative. So surely the KNLA now controlling nearly all the Thailand border must help those groups in Eastern Bago region, the KNLA and the others, not just for ease of movement of arms from Thailand to Myanmar, but also the financial revenue from that border.
So these recent attacks, will definitely help consolidate this very important border area and route. And I think that what's more important for these recent attacks is more about consolidating and regulating border trade from Yangon, Naypyidaw, Mandalay through Myawaddy, as a kind of ASEAN trade corridor. The resistance forces and the KNLA, they really want to keep the new Asia Highway shut. And instead, what they've done is they've set up this sort of taxation apparatus up on the old Asia Highway. And then further south, together with the DKBA, actually, they're building a new road as well that will connect trade. So what they're trying to do is cut off formal trade that will benefit the Myanmar state and instead control trade through the two different trade routes and then also benefit from taxation.
All right. So related to that then, Saw DC, can I ask you, is the relationship between the KNLA and Thailand going to change because of this? Is the relationship between Thailand and the SAC going to change in light of this stronger KNLA presence and control along the border?
Yeah, from my perspective, the Myanmar and the Thailand, they are the government, G2G that they are coordinate. And for example, in terms of those kind of the fighting on the border, and if the resistance group clean up all of those border, I think this is the very strategic way that to cut in terms of the border relations, in terms of the trade or those kind of between the Thai and Myanmar governments. And there, for example, if in the border, if there's no more control by the SAC, and of course, it's likely that the Thai government will pay attention and are likely to participate and willing to participate and to participate and to coordinate in terms of the trade or what else with the KNU and also the resistance group on the border. I think we can give the example like in the Bangladesh, for example. Previously, the government of the Bangladesh had the close connection or G2G with the Myanmar government after AA clean out all those border lines. And then the government of the Bangladesh, they pay attention to the AA, and then he said, okay, we are happy to build the friendship and then make a friends and trade with on the border with AA and this kind of thing,
Thanks, DC. So Thailand has been accused of restricting supply of ammunition to the KNLA and to PDFs. So will these border victories change access to ammunition for these groups? Of course, they get a one-off windfall bonus, and, there are videos that have already come out from the victory at Borbo of dozens of guns, hundreds of bullets, drones, things like that. But will these victories actually lead to tangible improvements in access to ongoing supplies of ammunition?
The Thai governments, there are two different of the Thai authority as well. Some might, especially the local authority of the Thai government, I think they left or they want to support the local resistance group. Of course, there are another group that, they want to cut its way with the Myanmar government and give pressure to the resistance group. But the current Thai government I feel like it's a perfect government. That even though Texas is not in the power, but he always is the behind. His daughter. To back it to the history, and that Texas has had a very close relationship with the Thai Shui. Some group of the Thai authority, they left to support the resistance group, but some want to support the Myanmar government.
So in terms of, ammunition, absolutely right. We regularly hear that ammunition is a serious constraining factor. And compared to when we see these large offensive like 1027 in other parts of the country, one of the reasons that this hasn't happened in the Southeast is because of the shortages of ammo and in particular the price of ammo. So I think that for like a quite common caliber, people were telling us that before the coup it was 15 baht, but now it's gone up to 50 or 60 baht. And then also when we bear in mind that a lot of the fundraising that happens for the resistance forces, happens online, and a lot of it's in Myanmar chat. So the depreciation of the chat as well has meant that in real terms, it's just much more expensive to buy ammo. And in particular, so the prices have gone up, but also Thailand is restricting the supply. And in particular, that period of time when China was cooperating very closely with Thailand to close down the border, PDF leaders were kind of explaining it to us that this was a kind of, pincer movement from China to kind of force ceasefires in the north and now kind of put pressure on this border. And they really, saw it in terms of not just a clampdown on scam centers, but also as a kind of counterinsurgent strategy to sort of ensure that they weren't able to get supplies or ammunition easily. And then the other really important component as well is drone parts. And in particular, China and Thailand have been collaborating very closely, and they've been, really stopping the flow of multi-use drone parts that usually come through things like AliExpress or Lazada. And in particular, a lot of drone operators' houses have been raided, and in Maysot as well. So this is also another problem because, for quite a long time, the resistance has had the advantage over drones. But more recently, it seems that, that there's been a real shortage in supplies, coupled with SAC technological advances.
Okay, Tony, you've referred a bit there to the fieldwork you've done as an academic writing a PhD thesis about conflict in Karen State. So I want to ask, in your research, what's the impact of these developments in Kawthoolei for the wider revolution or revolutions or politics in general in Myanmar?
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me respond briefly, but perhaps in two parts. I think in terms of other resistance actors behind the scenes, and quietly, even before the coup, that the KNLA has played a really important role in collaborating and fostering other armed groups, and in particular, you see pictures of Borbo traveling around to different theaters of conflict and collaborating and engaging with different resistance leaders. So, this includes, with the AA, who has a base in Brigade 5, as well as, giving sanctuary to the BPLA as well. So, I see that role as continuing and ongoing. And then, obviously on the governance front, in terms of, EROs and subnational councils, I think that September statement of those groups kind of, saying in a way, actually, we're just going to move forward in solidarity and in recognition, but we're going to really work on how to consolidate governance in our areas, I think was a kind of a move of solidarity, but also I think it, shows, the steps and direction that they want to go into with the KNU. And I think for the KNU, trying to sort of create what they're calling a Kawthoolei government is going to be really interesting. And I think, they're really trying to sort of overhaul and deepen their governance institutions across the areas that they operate. And, and I think this is an incredibly ambitious project, but also, I think also kind of at its heart, it has, a lot of this revolutionary spirit where they kind of, want to create at this local level much more sort of diverse platforms that bring in different ethnicities and different either smaller groups such as Muslim communities or particularly or different marginalized communities, direct in decision making. And I think that, there's a lot of ambition there, but if they're able to sort of bring these plans into fruition, I think this will have, tremendously, positive outcome for this kind of, much larger political project. And certainly, just reflecting back on some of my field work, I was very fortunate and I was able to spend 3 months teaching in a school up in Mutro. And, and what I saw there, I was kind of studying local administration was, in some ways, it was economically circumscribed. But on the whole, what I saw was a really well-functioning administration that brought local people in and was responsible and reactive and accountable to local people in ways that, I really do think, could become a kind of a template or perhaps like a kind of almost like a trailblazer, an example of what other areas could work to where really, sort of there are constraints, but on the whole sort of people are very happy and there's a sort of very dynamic interactive relationship between local people and the KNU administration.
Thanks, Tony. So now the last question is for you, DC. Tony mentions there people who are largely happy under KNU administration. So I want to ask you, are people happier now when news like this happens of these defeats along the border, these victories? Do you notice a shift in morale in the KNU or the KNLA leadership? Are local people, are they looking forward to the next opportunity to achieve victory for their homeland, or are people still struggling in what are essentially war zones, suffering from precarity, living in fear from airstrikes? Thanks.
Yeah, I think it depends. For example, in the situation of the Mudra, and to talk about this kind of things, in the first or second year of the airstrike in the Mudra district, many of the local people, civilians, they are traumatized, and they but after 2 or 3 years later, many of them, they have a self-resilience. Of course, even though they are airstrike, they have self-resilience, and then they know how to adapt with this kind of situation. The SAC might think that, okay, they will keep on uses the airstrike, and that when they control the space, and then they will be able to control the territory. For the local, I think to be able to control the territory on the ground is more effective than to control the airspace. Of course, it's many problems because of the airstrike, but in some parts of the Mudra, they have got self-resilience, and especially the government, the local government, they are prepared, and they are equipped. They are in terms of the public administration, in terms of the local government, to strengthen the local governments, and even the local government, they start doing the we call citizenship or ID card of the Kawthoolei. To be able to have the self-rule and self-determination to be the Kawthoolei. Actually, I think it's the good development that they have, and the good improvement that they have been so far. Even though they are in the hardship of the airstrike, of course they are doing what they are doing, and also they're able to, they can do based on their plans. Yeah.
Thank you, Saw DC. I agree. There's no doubt that the KNU is resilient. This year is their 76th anniversary. It was a great pleasure to have you both on the show. I look forward to the next time.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me in this conversation. I'm happy to talk about it.
Yeah, and big thanks for inviting us here today to have a conversation with you.
And a third thank you to our listeners, to you, for keeping up with what's happening in Myanmar. Please get in touch with your feedback on the show. You can email whimyanmar@proton.me. Until next week, though, farewell and take care.